Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to your breaking news coverage of Super Tuesday. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott at election headquarters here at BillWhittle.com. Gentlemen, I'm sure you've been checking the teletype tapes all morning. The results from yesterday's Super Tuesday election are in, and the results are exactly as I have foreseen. Execute Order 66. Do it. So we have ourselves a horse race all of a sudden when just a few weeks ago, it didn't look like we would be having a horse race. Joe Biden managed to pull something out in South Carolina a few days ago, got him back on the board. And although it looks like Bernie has more delegates, Joe did pretty well for a guy whose campaign was pretty much written off 2 or 3 weeks ago. So it looks like there's going to be a horse race. And before we get into like the specific details, let's just take kind of our general opinions on this. Steve, I don't see how things could have gone better for Republicans last night. The one thing that would be good for Republicans would be, never interrupt your enemy while he's committing a blunder, as Napoleon. And Joe Biden did well enough last night that he either is going to be able to contest the convention, or he did well enough last night so that the Democrats can have a reasonable fig leaf of cheating himself into the convention, as they did with Hillary Clinton in 2016. And the coronation of Bernie Sanders as, the king who's about to be overthrown by Bernie Sanders, seems to have been delayed momentarily.
Yeah. Wow. It was a hell of a thing. Virginia, boy, that was a real shocker. Not that Biden won it, but that it won it by the huge numbers that he did. It really shows that Virginia is fully in control of the establishment Democrats, period. Full stop. They own Northern Virginia. They're running the state badly. But nevertheless, they drove a turnout machine that was just incredible and gave Biden, 2/3 of the vote or something like that. It was huge. The really big number might have been Donald Trump scoring, I think it was 1.4 million votes in the California primary. Let me pull the.
How many votes were cast? Do you know?
For whom?
Total votes were cast in California. Do you know?
No, but I'm looking at. Well, hang on, that's Alabama.
That was probably 1.40003 million votes.
Yeah. GOP primaries. Here we go. California. Yeah, Donald Trump has 1,444,938 votes, which is 92.6%. Joe Walsh got 2.5%. Same with Bill Weld. But the turnout is huge. There is really no reason for Republicans to vote in California.
I certainly didn't go vote yesterday. There's just absolutely no reason to. Do you know how many votes Bernie Sanders got in terms of gross numbers?
That's what I'm looking at. He's just shy of 1 million, and that's with 98.82% of precincts reporting.
I got to make sure I understand this because I'm beginning to see your point. Are you telling me that Donald Trump got more votes than Bernie Sanders in California yesterday?
Yes.
Oh my God!
If you add Bernie and Biden's votes together,
no.
But yeah,
he got more votes than Bernie,
yes.
and he got more votes than Biden. He didn't get more votes than both of them, but he got more than either one of them.
Yes. But what really counts is the number of delegates won. So far, California has only portioned, I think, about 100 of their 415 or 16 delegates. So right now, Biden's in the lead with 461 to Sanders 404 as we go into the next round of primaries. And there are still about 300 delegates to be awarded out of California. Sanders is going to get the lion's share out of those. So in terms of delegates won, it's pretty much a dead heat between Biden and Sanders. But Biden showed that Bernie doesn't connect with black voters at all. There's still a lot of southern states, a lot of industrial Midwestern states left to go. Biden should clean up in those if Super Tuesday is any indication.
Scott, I'd like to get your take on the whole thing just in general, but I was also wondering if when you're done with your little around the table look, whether you'd be interested in commenting on numerous Bernie bros who've said that if Bernie Sanders doesn't get the nomination, they're going. Where's the Democratic convention this year?
Milwaukee.
They're going to burn Milwaukee down,
Yeah.
They say, if he doesn't get it.
Save the beer. Hashtag save the beer. Yeah, a couple of things here. First of all, to our California viewers, and by the way, we have a large audience for this show and the other shows that we do at BillWhittle.com in California, including a large audience for our podcast. the audio versions of these shows. And let me just evoke a biblical Old Testament phrase for these folks in California: a remnant remains. Don't become discouraged.
Yes.
There are still, some who have not bowed the knee to Baal in California. And so.
No, California is eliminating bail.
We have the. That's right. At least cash bail. We got to remember, in all of these blue states, so called, they're just designated blue states because they vote majority Democrat. It doesn't mean that they're bereft of conservatives or of Republicans, but that it's just currently, with the current zeitgeist, they're overwhelmed, sometimes by small margins. In any case, thank you to those folks in California who've risen up and taken the initiative to vote in an election. As Bill pointed out, you don't really need to vote in. I think a couple of weeks ago, I said that what this field needed in order to contravene or counteract the Sanders movement is some well-timed dropouts, and we got that.
Yep.
So the well-timed dropout of Tom Steyer, and not that he was a big impact, but Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar stepping away from the race and then endorsing Joe Biden, along with the guy who stepped out back in November. What was that guy's name in Texas? Beto O'Rourke. As a Texas guy.
The next president of the United States, Beto O'Rourke.
Scott, did you see the Babylon Bee headline?
No.
It read something like El Paso man comes down off a bad LSD trip thinking he'd run for president.
So now there's some consolidation. And I think what that did was give a lot of moderate Democrats, so-called, permission to get on board the Biden train. And I personally know some people who I didn't know whether or not they'd be able to easily make that transition to Joe Biden. But apparently they looked at that and they said, you know what, anybody but Sanders. And so they've done that. And so, in general, I think that's what we saw. We saw a consolidation of the moderate vote in a way that allowed enough votes to accumulate to push Biden over the top. I also think at this point that Sanders, I hate to make this prediction because just a week or two ago, Bill, you said Joe Biden was dead. I think Bernie Sanders is dead now.
I don't know if he's dead, but he's in trouble.
Yeah, and no, he's not literally dead yet. But this what the Biden campaign should now call Lazarus Tuesday has really had an impact on the race. In addition to the South Carolina victory before that, and Joe is going to do well in those so-called Rust Belt states, those battleground states, and it's going to make it very hard for Bernie Sanders' movement to be able to muster an electable majority going into July when they've got to pick a nominee for this party.
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you think about the violence issue, real quick, though, Scott? Because this is why things are looking so good, I think, for Republicans. If Biden makes the comeback, Bernie had such a strong start that a number of people believe, especially given what happened in 2016, that, well, by golly, he's the nominee. They don't seem to care too much about actual democracy in this particular regard. Do you think that if it turns out that Biden is able to go to the convention with enough nominees to basically come out of it with the nomination, that the Bernie Sanders people are just going to go, okay, well, I guess we're Biden people now? It doesn't seem likely to me.
No, and I don't think it's going to be contested. I really don't think it's going to be that close. Even though the delegate count at this point looks really close, I think that the momentum, I hate to say it, has really swung in the direction of Biden. And there are a lot of Democrats who might not have previously shown up because they thought, well, I'm not going to be part of sending this socialist to the White House. But there are a lot of normal people who happen to be registered in the Democratic Party who are going to say, okay, yeah, now we got permission to vote for somebody who, in our view, is a relatively moderate person. So I don't think there's going to be a contested convention. And frankly, the so-called Bernie bros who have been making threats of physical violence, political economists and social psychologists have a term for these people. They're called pussies.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you said that, because one thing I've noticed about the Bernie bros is that I have not heard Bernie Sanders, despite the fact that several of them have been on videotape, many of them have made public comments about burning Milwaukee if Bernie's not the nominee. I haven't heard Bernie condemn any of them yet. Have you?
Steve, you're more tuned into that kind of thing. Have you heard such a thing?
No. Okay. First, I have to say the only thing I want for my birthday this year, my wife keeps asking me, is I want a brokered convention in Milwaukee. That's all I want.
Me too.
And I was hoping that Biden would do well enough on Super Tuesday to prevent Sanders from getting the nomination. And clearly that got all turned topsy-turvy. So what I'm hoping now is that Sanders does well enough to deny Biden the nomination. But I kind of agree with Scott here. That seems unlikely. Once a moderate develops this kind of momentum, it's very hard to stop, especially with the calendar schedule and the proportional awarding of delegates that the Democrats do. Republicans do winner take all, so that a surprise victory in one state can yield a rich treasure trove of delegates and put somebody back in the race. The Democrats don't do it that way. They award 2/3 of each state's delegates by the winner of the congressional district, again, proportionately. And there's another third of each state's delegates that get awarded proportionally by the statewide vote. And that's why Sanders is going to clean up in California, because none of the candidates other than Biden crossed the 15% threshold for winning any delegates statewide. So, they may get some local delegates here and there.
By the way, Steve, the guy who's still clinging to the hope of a brokered convention is Michael Bloomberg, who did pick up something like 7 delegates.
Don't cheat my next question.
Hang on a second. But I will say that if you can go into the convention as essentially the king of American Samoa, I think you have a chance.
Yes, the king of American Samoa.
So let's talk about Mini Mike, the guy whose economic shrewdness has earned him a $60 billion fortune. As we record this, I'm just looking at Wikipedia. It says there's 6 delegates for American Samoa. And as you all know, that Mike Bloomberg decisively carried American Samoa. He spent $500 million on his campaign, which means that he spent $83,333,333 per delegate.
Well, he has 46 delegates total. He's picked up. He's picked up some here and there through other states, and he might even get a few out of California.
So let's say he gets 47.
47. There we go.
That means his delegates are more valuable than the other people's delegates. They're worth much more.
That's correct, because they cost $10 million apiece.
That's right.
$10 million apiece. Why am I not a Democratic Party delegate? I could have been had for half that price.
That's right.
I could have been had for considerably less than half that price.
Michael, call me.
So we've been saying on Right Angles and Bill Whittle Now's for ever since Bloomberg really decided he was going to make open up the checkbook for this. I've been saying, you guys have been saying, Mike, there's a lot of things you can buy, but charisma and likability are not among them.
He could have bought some debate prep.
Well, here's a scary thing, Steve. Here's a scary thing. Miserable as he was during those debates, I think that was Mike Bloomberg as prepped as he's going to be.
Wow.
Can I just say that there's something that this has proved that Democrats are going to be loath to embrace, but something that the Mike Bloomberg phenomenon and actually one other aspects of Super Tuesday has incontrovertibly proven is that money doesn't buy elections. And the
Correct.
Democrats have made a big dang deal about the fact that big money and corporate money and all that kind of stuff is buying elections. Mike Bloomberg couldn't buy himself an election anywhere. Not only that, but Elizabeth Warren lost her home state to Joe Biden, who essentially didn't spend a nickel in Massachusetts.
Yep.
And
Same thing
to
in
Bernie
Minnesota.
Sanders, right? Didn't she come in third?
Yes, she came in third place in her home state.
Third.
Right.
And Minnesota.
So when people say, oh, he's got this giant war chest, I've never believed, I certainly haven't believed it since 2016 when Hillary Clinton had $1 billion+ at her command.
Yeah.
It's not about money.
No.
And I think it becomes decreasingly about money every year. I think television political ads, the ones that cost money, become less and less and less effective every election cycle. So Mike is reassessing the campaign.
No, he dropped out.
I think he's
out.
He did?
Andy endorsed Biden just in the last half an hour or 40 minutes.
See, that will teach me to spend time preparing for shows here and ignoring what's in the breaking news.
Okay, so he's out, and Warren has she
Warren is
officially
not out
conceded?
yet.
And by the way,
that'll probably
Bloomberg has committed to spending his wealth, not just at his own election, but to defeating Trump. So he said that he will financially back the eventual nominee, and also he'll invest heavily in down ballot races to make sure that Democrats can win across the board. So he's not out.
Which will have
he's just out as a candidate.
No. But his big buying downstream from this point forward is going to have the same impact as his buying prior to him being ejected from the race at a cost of $10 million per delegate is going to have. Nobody cares, Mike. You can't buy people's opinion anymore. It's just not that world anymore.
Yeah, but he does have the ground organization to mount a pretty effective GOTV operation on behalf of a candidate that people actually want.
Maybe. Not impressed.
Well, okay. Well, he bought the Virginia government, but he wasn't on the ballot there.
That's right. If Donald Trump can turn out more voters in California for an election for a primary that there is no reason to go out and vote for whatsoever, then I'm feeling just shockingly good. Okay, so we're down to a two-person race, right, guys?
Yeah.
I mean, Elizabeth Warren's mathematical chances, I think they said, is now 1 in 1,024. She'll undoubtedly drop out, if not by the end of the day today, but before the next primary.
She has a kitten's
go.
chance in a wood chipper.
Yeah, so couldn't happen to a nicer kitten.
Toward more picturesque speech there.
Didn't Trump tweet that she did so miserably in her home state? Now she and her husband can finally go kick back and have themselves a gold beer.
That was brilliant. Hey,
okay, so let's. Good.
Yeah, let me throw something out there. If we have any moderate Democrats watching this show today, and you've been worried about the direction your party's been taking with this far leftward lurch with Bernie Sanders and AOC and all the rest who get so much media and Twitter attention, and if you are thankful today that seems to have been snuffed out or at least redirected away from that,
down.
What you need to do, if you want somebody to thank for saving your party from the socialist wing, you need to go out and find a black Super Tuesday primary voter and give them a big hug because they saved your party last night.
Can I throw in another Betsy Warren thing here? This was a headline in the Washington Examiner. Elizabeth Warren just reminded voters why they didn't pick her. Elizabeth tweets out after her thumping in Massachusetts, she says, yes, these are hard times. Yes, people are afraid, and the danger is real. Our very democracy hangs in the balance. But Latinx and Chicano history teaches us the power of fighting back.
Yeah, how do you think that Latinx thing plays with a culture that's still pretty macho? She's so tone deaf.
Precious.
Well, that was always the question, wasn't it, for Elizabeth Warren from the beginning? As she's trying to win the presidency, but the question always became how. I can't stop it. I'm sorry. It's beyond my control. She deserves it. She deserves it. It's a repulsive, disgusting individual, and couldn't happen to a nicer person. I'm just sorry we're going to see her disappearing from Saturday Night Live, which I've not been watching. So now it's time. As all of the variables are eliminated. Yeah. Hey, let me just ask you guys just real quick on this. Things are happening more or less the way I thought they would happen, but they seem to be happening much faster than I thought they would happen.
Now, come on, Bill. Let's be honest. I think you need a little mea culpa about your prediction about Joe Biden at this point.
Which one?
The one where you said he was dead over and over again.
Oh, well, I guess I do.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, I mostly remember saying he's not electable, but if I said he's dead, I'm sure he did. Just selective memory, which often works in my favor.
You're in good company,
especially when I'm assessing my own accuracy rate.
100%.
But we're now down. So now we're down to two people. That's really pretty much it. And the reason that I started this off by saying I don't see how this could have gone better for Republicans is because if either one of these two had a overwhelming lead, as it looked like Bernie was going to have prior to South Carolina, then at the very least, you reduce the civil unrest in the Democratic. Let me rephrase that term. I'm talking about civil unrest. It's mostly a result of the Bernie bros. The political unrest, the political division in the Democratic Party, one way or another. If it had been all Biden or all Sanders, at the very least, they would have had a chance to rally behind a an appallingly bad candidate. But now it looks like this is now going to be a fight to the finish between two candidates who Donald Trump has already shown in an election he really wasn't even in could handily beat either one of them. And while Bernie is going to continue to be the curmudgeon that he is, and as you guys have both pointed out, the Joe momentum certainly seems to be increasing. As we discussed in my right angle this week, I suspect Joe Biden is going to become, as charitably as we can put this, less and less and less effective as the year goes on into the convention and then into the general election. So if I'm a Democrat right now, I'm not feeling real good about this. I'm not feeling like either one of these candidates can really beat Donald Trump. And the reason I feel this is because and we started to learn this almost immediately after the very first the Iowa caucuses. In a party that has for since the election of Barack Obama and prepping the ground well before that, in the Democratic Party, who has decided to make identity politics the way to divide the country and rule over the ruins, the idea that in order for Democrats to win a national election, they have to have 85-90% of the black vote as an example. Therefore, we have to demonize everybody else. As a party that has thrown its fur-covered hat with a star on the front into the ring of identity politics, they're left with two old, white, straight millionaires. And while Bernie drums up this bizarre kind of support among certain types of people, other kinds of people are, I don't see anybody out there. I haven't seen anybody out there really as a group or really even as an individual or even as a crowd that was like so pro Biden. It was like, well, we like Biden better than Bernie and we like Biden better than Trump. Bernie's got genuine support, but neither one of them seems to have the kind of support that Donald Trump has in terms of just this sort of, the California vote results that you mentioned at the beginning, Steve. It's just astonishing. It's astonishing.
It really is. I feel like Biden is the Bob Dole. You've got an incumbent in a strong position that's going to be very difficult to unseat. I mean, people don't unseat incumbents when wages are rising. It just doesn't happen. And that's not me getting cocky. That's just me looking at history. Nobody was going to beat Bill Clinton in 1996. So, okay, nominate the old guy, the war hero. Let him take one last lap around the track and, raise the banner for him and then send him off. And that's exactly what the GOP did with Bob Dole in 96. And I get the feeling this is the Democrats' way of sending Biden off in the very nicest way possible. I just don't know if he's going to live through it. But that's what we talked about on your segment yesterday.
I heard a report on the BBC this morning that was being rebroadcast by NPR where they were making an analogy between Jeremy Corbyn, the later Labour Party leader in Britain, and Bernie Sanders. And they were talking about how Jeremy Corbyn, for his part, has never been popular. Has been an intensely unpopular person in Britain, but he doesn't inspire the kind of zeal and affection that Bernie Sanders has managed to in the United States. And this guy in Britain thought that Americans were pretty likely to elect Bernie Sanders because when things aren't going well, you're willing to make changes even if they're radical changes. And I thought, What are they watching for news over there? For whatever you may think of Donald Trump, if you pay attention to the economic indicators, and even if you want to credit it to beginning during the Obama administration, worst case scenario, it's still continuing on an upward glide path, notwithstanding the novel coronavirus, but things are going fairly well. And apparently the people in the media and the people around the world think somehow America is in the Great Depression and desperate to find a socialist solution.
Well, they think that because that's how Elizabeth Warren talks, and that's how Bernie Sanders talks, and that's to a lesser degree how Biden talks. But Biden is more old school Democrat. Last night he was talking about Wall Street didn't build this country, you built it. And this is kind of this typical old kind of 1930s sort of, this is how you campaign against Herbert Hoover. But in any event, Yes, it's the economy, stupid. People are doing well. They don't want fundamental change. They don't want Bernie's kind of change at all. So now comes the time for the great procrastination and procrastination. It's time for us to get out our Karnak, the magnificent turbans, and try and predict what's going on. Bless you, Steve.
Thank you.
Steve picked up the what was it called? The
conservative virus.
It's COVID 34, I think. It's
19.1. It's the beta version.
I'm absolutely miserable, but I wasn't going to miss this for anything. I woke up this morning and I swear to God, I coughed up an entire raw chicken breast.
Oh, well, at least that's good for you. Raw chicken breast, it could have been worse. Could have coughed up a cheeseburger. Now, what happens here, right? As I said, to me, as a person who is, to say the least, deeply opposed to the Democratic Party policies of the present and who bears no affection whatsoever to either one of these candidates in any way. I find both of them to be terrible, appalling candidates and bad people on top of it. So now what do we see now? So they're just looking forward to the convention now. Just I'll ask each one of you this. Do you think that this convention is going to be open? Or do you think somebody's going to go into the convention with enough delegates to have it won before they get there? Scotty?
Yeah, it's hard for me to imagine the Democratic Party actually permitting a contested convention.
Now that's a different story.
Yeah, but even on the just facts on the ground, without any behind-the-scenes manipulation, I think that Biden goes into the convention with sufficient delegates to capture the nomination on a first ballot. And I think the greater problem, because really the Democratic candidate is a placeholder, for anybody but Trump. And so whoever that person is, you've got an American electorate that is relatively equally divided. President Trump's team will once again execute a highly effective electoral college strategy, while I think there are still many Democrats who are deluded into thinking that this is a national election. And you can tell that by looking at the coverage. In fact, I was talking to my wife last night, who kind of loosely follows what's going on with this, but she's certainly not, eating and drinking it the way I do. And she kept asking, why are they saying how many states one candidate or the other won last night? Because delegates is really what counts. And I said, that's a really good question. What difference does it make to say Joe Biden won 9 states and Bernie Sanders won 4 or whatever the shakeout was? Because the reality is they're playing for delegates right now. They're accumulating delegates. And so I think by the same token, the Trump campaign understood last time, will understand this time, that they're playing for electoral college votes. Will the Democrats wise up and realize that that's the contest and be able to convert what was a popular vote majority in the 2016 election into an electoral vote majority this time around? Remains to be seen. But I don't think you're going to see any diminution of the support for President Trump. And in fact, you're going to see an elevation of that, as proven by the turnout in uncontested primaries for Republicans. And so, I see nothing to stop a Biden nomination nor a Trump reelection.
Hang on one second, Steve. Since you were just talking about how the news is reporting that Joe carried this many states, Bernie carried that many states, don't you think that what they're basically, the information they're trying to convey there is that since the states elect the president, isn't that an indication of Bernie is stronger in California than Joe is, and when you get to the general election, California comes in with 52 electoral votes. Aren't they trying to color the general election map by saying this guy's more likely to win here, that guy's more likely to win there?
I think the mainstream media, consciously or not, is intensely relieved at the prospect that they may not have to be backing the Sanders campaign going into the fall. So I think any way of couching that data that makes it look like Joe Biden has got some momentum, I think is positive for them. But I think they're two different sports, essentially. The primary is a completely different sport from the general election. And so any comparisons between the two are really not valid.
One's a basketball game, and
you're
one's a
playing
football
for
game.
different things. And so, I've always kind of joked that that big league soccer would do much better in the United States if every goal was 7 points. It's because, because that's what we do.
Scores, you win.
In football, it's like a touchdown is 6 points. If it were just 1 point, and nobody would be like, "Oh, the Bears got 3 points last night," but I can't, nobody would be excited about that. So I think if you understand the game you're playing, and clearly the Trump campaign does, you'll do much better. And I fully predict that in December, there will be a bunch of Democrats talking about how Bernie Sanders Biden won the popular vote again.
I'll come back. I got one more question for you after this. I want to go to Steve for the question about the convention. By the way, I think it's a Norm Macdonald joke because he got the countries wrong. But he says yesterday, I think it was when he was on Saturday Night Live. Yesterday, Portugal defeated Mexico by a score of 1-0, or as they say in soccer, a blowout.
I just love the soccer
Steve,
comes to Springfield commercial from The Simpsons. One of my favorite things of all
Which
time.
will be the greatest nation in the world, Mexico versus Portugal, to determine who's the greatest country in the world. Okay, so Steve, what do you think? You think the convention's going to be a one-vote deal and a coronation? I want to talk about what happens to Bernie after the convention, but do you think Joe is going to be able to basically walk into Milwaukee and walk out with the nomination?
I think so. But just because it isn't a brokered convention doesn't mean it can't be all fun and violent and burn things down. If there are any Bernie bros reading or watching this, I want you to listen to something I saw on Twitter earlier. Joe Lockhart, the old
Clinton associate, right?
Clinton associate, yeah. He put up on Twitter earlier this morning, anyone who says the primaries last night were rigged, ask them to tell you specifically how they were rigged. I'm sure the answers will be amusing, if nothing else. And Jim Hansen, Uncle Jimbo from Black 5 and a number of other places, said, okay, I'll play. The votes weren't rigged. The process was. Bloomberg allowed to debate, attack socialist Bernie, Dems pushed Buttigieg and Klobuchar out, helping Joe Biden, kept Warren in, hurting Bernie Sanders. The media ran propaganda interference for Biden. Nicely done, but rigged. So, you need to burn it down.
Interesting how the socialists seems to have been defeated by the tactics of socialist countries and things of that nature, but we'll leave that irony for later. Yep. So now to the final question. Since and I happen to agree with you, I suspect right now, as things are going, this certainly South Carolina showed that Bernie does not have the universal appeal that we thought he did prior to the South, and many suspected he would not. But he certainly seems to have done far worse than people would have expected him to do just 2-3 weeks ago. No. Scott was completely convinced that Biden was out of the race, and I was saying, no, Biden's a real threat.
Texas and Minnesota were huge losses for Sanders. He won Minnesota by like 60-40 against Clinton, or even better than that 4 years ago. And
yeah, his support is weaker than it was in 2016.
Yeah. And I would just remind my colleague Bill Whittle, that these shows are recorded and that the archive contains the previously recorded shows, right?
I also know that due to our extraordinarily detailed marketing strategy, finding old shows is virtually impossible. That was certainly worth the risk. In any event, so now the big question, which I think has been the question, certainly even if Biden had choked, this would be the question. Even let's just say Biden had just completely cratered and it was Bernie all the way. The question has been from the beginning, and I have video documentation of this, that the Democratic Party in 2020 was on the rocks to begin with, that there was no way for them to win an election where you had half of the party going for whatever moderate managed to survive versus this extremely loud, extremely vocal, extremely violent, and extremely passionate far left socialist wing of AOC and the crew and Bernie Sanders and all the rest of them. So whether Biden had cratered or not, you're still stuck with a Democratic Party that's come a general election time now is going to be divided in half. So, Steve, let's start with you. Let's say that in fact, the nice thing about logic is we can deal with both cases. I'd like both your opinions on the same question. Let's say, for the sake of the argument, that Biden wins the nomination. Does Bernie run as an independent?
No.
You don't think so?
Not a chance. What's maybe more interesting than that, though, is typically candidates run to the left if they're Democrats during the primary, or to the right during the primary if they're Republicans, and then pivot back towards the center for the general election. If you're Joe Biden, what the hell were you thinking in that tiny little addled pea brain of yours by naming Beto O'Rourke your gun control guy the night before Super Tuesday? How is he ever going to pivot back to the center with Mr. Gun Grabber? Damn right, I'll take your AR-15s as
that's not the
as
question.
his gun controls are.
I want to.
You want to know
get
if
to
Bernie
that,
runs independent?
Yes.
I don't see it happening.
You think he throws his support to Joe Biden?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so now the question, staying with you, Steve. Now the question is, Bernie may do that, but certainly I don't suspect the Bernie bros are going to come out and turn out for Joe Biden in any large numbers, especially since they've. I understand that that there's always a lunatic fringe that is making statements, but in general, given the behavior of the social justice crowd, I find it hard to believe that even if Bernie endorses Biden, that half or that third of the Democratic Party, the social justice warrior crowd, is going to come out for Joe Biden.
Well, okay, here's the problem the Democrats have. This may not seem like I'm answering your question, but I really am. It just might take me a short while to get there. Democrats can't really win without winning Pennsylvania back. It's huge that Trump took Pennsylvania. They'd have to peel off Florida, which just doesn't seem likely. To win Pennsylvania back, you have to get back the Obama voters who were disappointed by Obama and took a chance on Trump. These guys tend to be for tariffs. They tend to be fairly socially conservative. And how is Biden going to appeal to these voters by saying, I'm going to take your guns and I'm going to eliminate fracking?
Yeah, and plus,
now, Sanders could
Donald
appeal
Trump
to
has
those
delivered.
Guys.
Yeah, that's right. And Donald Trump has delivered this tremendous economic
the blue collar
boom to everybody.
Yeah,
it's going to be tough for them. What do you think, Scott? Does if Biden wins the nomination, does Bernie go as an independent?
No, Bernie doesn't go as an independent, and Bernie does endorse Biden, and the tiny fraction of Bernie bros who make the largest caterwauling won't be a factor, other than kind of social
rushing the stage,
social
or
media, tumult that they might cause, but it's not going to affect the election. If Bernie Sanders can say he gets behind Hillary Clinton, I think he can certainly back Joe Biden.
Well, he got behind Clinton and she lost.
Yeah, well, and I'm not saying that's going to help Joe Biden. I'm just saying that I don't think it's going to be a problem for the Democrats. I think that the Democrats are in a troubling situation right now. First of all, there will be a grieving period for Bernie supporters who are really disenchanted about the fact that once again his ideas were not the popular ideas, that they were not electable ideas. They'll, of course, blame the Democratic establishment, as I've already seen headlines today after Super Tuesday indicating that the establishment is getting what it wants, and by nefarious means, of course. But a lot of Bernie supporters are going to have a grieving period, and they need to be allowed to grieve if Democrats are smart. And then eventually they're going to make their way over and say, ultimately, no matter who the Democrats put up, it's got to be better than Donald Trump, which is the way that they'll see it. This puts the Democratic Party in an interesting position in two ways. Number one is I think that the Democrats have now been making an argument for some time that you need to vote for us in the next election because we're losers. Because we can't beat Donald Trump at anything. Brett Kavanaugh is sitting on the Supreme Court. The taxes have been cut.
The economy is doing great.
The economy is continuing on an upward trajectory. We have failed to impeach him. The Mueller report didn't produce the result that we had hoped. And so essentially, vote for us, who have now a long tradition of losing to Donald Trump, so that we don't have to be losers anymore. And my final comment would be to moderate Democrats out there. And I say this very sincerely. Your party has no place for you anymore. There's nothing there for you. And even if you find Donald Trump's behavior or even some of his policies repugnant, just know that you're kind of like a lot of Republicans felt who didn't support Donald Trump. You're a man or a woman without a country right now. You don't have a place to call home. And I only say that to say you might want to open the scope of your search to find political affiliation possibilities beyond what your grandfather and your father had, and maybe start to consider that in the long run, there is a party that cares about individual liberty. There is a party that cares about an economy that continues to grow. There is a party that will protect your right to keep and bear arms. There is a party that reveres the Constitution as written. And there is a party that knows that keeping America strong in the long term is the best way to sustain peace. I don't work for that party. I'm not a paid shill for that party. But you may want to cast about for a new home, because the Democratic Party has distinctly told you you're not welcome here.
It's well said. And I'd like to add to that that none of us are paid shills for the Republican Party. We're paid shills for the idea that the Republican Party more closely adheres to than the Democratic Party does. And we criticize the Republican Party many times because we believe in this idea of individualism, freedom. We believe in a limited government. We believe in being left alone. We believe in responsibility. And we believe that everyone should have a chance to succeed without other people telling you what to do. To the degree that Republicans conform to those ideas more than Democrats in certain areas, then we vote Republican, and they seem to in most areas. But that doesn't mean we're happy with the Republican Party, and that's the entire reason Donald Trump is here. I would just close with a couple of quick observations. I think I don't know enough about the ground game of delegates compared to either one of you to disagree with you. So if you both seem pretty confident that Biden's going to walk out with the nomination now, I'm just going to agree with that because I just don't know the math of how that works any better. But there are some things that I can comment about. One of them is looking at people's I've been saying from the beginning, forget about this election. It's one of my core tenets in terms of the kind of analysis that I do, is that people don't vote based on what they think. They vote based on how they feel. And this has always been the case. In the Mitt Romney example of having exit polling showing everybody thought Romney was better for the country in every single way, including their own pocketbooks, but thought that Barack Obama cared more about them than they did. Feelings are not only important, they are the dominant aspect of any election, especially in this country. And so now looking forward, I have to say, what's the emotional tone of the country? How do people feel? If the premise is, it's not exclusively how you feel, but if we're just going to look at how people feel, and if the premise is people vote the way they feel, how do people feel right now? Well, let's start with the Republicans. The Republicans feel that we've watched a 4-year temper tantrum and slow motion coup on the part of an American party, the other American party. It is a two-party system in this country. We have watched for almost 4 years now as the Democratic Party has done everything in their power not to compete against Donald Trump, not to offer better ideas than Donald Trump, and not even to really oppose Donald Trump in the way that an opposition party is intended to impose Donald Trump. We opposed Barack Obama, and that's why we have differing opinions. What we've seen, I'm talking about how Republicans feel. Republicans feel that we've watched 3 years of the most underhanded, dirty, mean-spirited, vicious lying, Russia collusion, Brett Kavanaugh's a rapist, Donald Trump with the Ukraine, impeachment, all of this. And the conclusion that Republicans come to is that leaving Donald Trump completely out of it as a person to vote for, what we've seen is a Democratic Party that is unwilling to accept the fact that they lost the election in 2016 and have done everything they can to overturn the 2016 election. That's not the same as trying to win in 2020. It's an entirely different thing. I think Republicans feel that the Democrats have done everything in their power to overturn the 2016 election, and that has made Republicans extraordinarily angry in a way I've never seen them before. And I don't mean frothing at the mouth, running on stage angry. I mean, okay, all right, we know how we can settle this issue. We settled this issue first Tuesday in November. And the fact that Donald Trump can pull more votes than either Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden in California tells me that Republicans feel motivated. It doesn't matter who it's going to be. They are motivated. They are going to show this Democratic Party that they are not going to allow the media elites and the show business elites and all the rest of these elites to overturn the will of the people. And I know many people who voted for Donald Trump with great trepidation, who are not only pleased with what Trump ended up doing, but are so appalled at the Democratic response to Donald Trump that they simply have abandoned the Democratic Party for the foreseeable future. So Republicans are feeling good. And Steve, you were at CPAC, and the mood there, to say the mood is confident is to probably understate the case quite a bit, I would say.
CPAC was kind of thrilling. The attitude was confident and happy. Happy Warriors.
Good. Did you think it was overconfident?
No.
I didn't either.
We've seen the Democrats come at us with literally everything fair and foul for the last 3+ years. And they failed. I think we're wiser and tougher as a result of it.
Well said. So that's how I think Republicans feel. I don't think I know a single Republican who feels like most every Republican I know feels very good about November right now, but not a single one of them I know. I've never, ever heard anyone say anything other than, let's not get cocky, kid. Every single person's going to have to get out there in November and make this happen. And the fact that what happened in California on Super Tuesday happened is a good indication that while the Kavanaugh assassination may not have been enough to motivate Republicans to come out in 2018, the Trump assassination attempt is certainly enough to make them come out strong in 2020. So I think Republicans are not only feeling confident and not only feeling happy, I think they're feeling motivated and they're also looking at their paychecks. So what does that leave in terms of the Democrats? How do they feel? Well, let's start with the Bernie people. The Bernie supporters are the only other segment of the American electorate that has the enthusiasm level of Donald Trump supporters. They're the only other voters in the country that have the level of enthusiasm for their candidate that Donald Trump has, that Republicans have for Donald Trump. Bernie Sanders, by your analysis, and I agree with it, is not likely to be the Democratic nominee. So if he's not, no matter how much Bernie supports Joe, no matter if Joe picks Bernie as vice president, which that's clearly not going to happen, no matter how much Bernie endorses Biden, and no matter how much or little division occurs between now and the Democratic convention, the most fired up, the most enthusiastic, the loudest, the most passionate, that's the word I'm looking for, the most passionate Democrats in the country will not have a person on the ballot. And not only will they not have their person on the ballot, they will have an old white male millionaire who has been in there for 100 years, which is why I always feared Pete Buttigieg, simply for the reason that he, like Obama, could have been somebody that young people could have projected their hopes onto. So they're not coming out. They're not. Some of them will come out because they hate Donald Trump, but those people are not motivated by hatred of Donald Trump. They're motivated by hatred of the system. They're motivated by hatred of capitalism. They're motivated by a promise of other people's stuff. And Joe Biden is not promising that to them, and they're not going to show up in the kind of numbers that they're going to need. They're just not. They're not going to be there. So what does that leave? That leaves the Democratic Party rallying around Joe Biden, who never, as Steve pointed out, in 50 years nearly of politics, had not won a primary in 3 or 4 attempts until South Carolina just a few days ago. It's the first time he'd ever won a primary election of any kind, ever. So he's not exactly Joe Biden is kind of a Bob Dole. It's like he's like the default candidate, and many people are saying, well, it's kind of his turn. The Democrats don't do that as much as Republicans. Republicans have, it's Bob Dole's turn. It's John McCain's turn. Let's just get the defeat over with as little fuss as possible. Joe Biden, if Joe Biden were to continue at his current level of mental health and mental acuity, will be destroyed in debates by Donald Trump. Destroyed. And I suspect he will be so badly matched against Donald Trump that Donald Trump will in fact show compassion to him.
No, that'd be deadly.
Only because it'd be deadly for Biden. Yeah. Because it will be clear in the same way that we saw with Jim Stockdale that we're not going to embarrass and humiliate this guy anymore. So I don't see how the Democrats pulled this off. I didn't see how they pulled it off from the beginning anyway, but I cannot imagine a worse outcome for the Democrats than the 2020 primaries that we've seen so far. Bernie was not a fringe candidate. It's not like Bernie carried Vermont, right, and went into the nomination with a handful of crazy supporters. He's won California and he's won significant number of states. And if he's not the nominee, large numbers of Democrats are not going to care. They're not going to feel it. They want the system changed, and they see Joe Biden as part of the system. So if you look at how people feel, I think this thing is a 48 state win for Donald Trump and maybe a 50 state win for Donald Trump if every single one of us understands that the only way for Donald Trump to lose this election now is for us to believe that there's no chance that Donald Trump can lose this election. That's the only way for him to lose, is for Republicans to assume that it's in the bag. And I just want to close by one final thing that Scott said. And this is to Democrats out there, moderate Democrats or so on, who feel like your party's abandoned you. I'm not going to elaborate on what Scott said so beautifully about your party having abandoned you. The Democratic Party does not have an American flag on the stage because many members of the people who run the Democratic Party are embarrassed by it. They're ashamed of an American flag on the stage. There are millions of Democrats who don't feel that way. So where does that leave you? I would leave you with one thought and simply, well, I'd leave you with two thoughts. First of all, consider the possibility that everything that you know about Republicans and Donald Trump is wrong. Consider the fact that you think that his supporters are violent. And we find out and Joe Podesta admitted in emails that the Democrats had to send people to Donald Trump rallies to start fights in order to make Donald Trump supporters look violent. I'd ask you to consider the fact that the people who are committing actual acts of political violence and black mass and smashing things and threatening to burn down cities are not Donald Trump supporters. They're Bernie Sanders supporters. They're Antifa. They're Democrats. They're left-wingers. I'd ask you to consider that Donald Trump supporters didn't say they would burn down Milwaukee or Washington if Donald Trump lost the election. Those are Democrats in name anyway who are doing all of that. So I would ask you just to consider this. And if you really want to have an interesting experience, you might want to try what a few other Democrats have done. And that is put a clothespin, you may remember those, on your nose, put on some glasses and a fake mustache and go to a Donald Trump rally and see if you find the racism that you've been told is there. Go for yourself. Why don't you just go and see with your own eyes if there's hatred for black people, hatred for women, hatred for Hispanics, or hatred for immigrants among the people that go for a Donald Trump rally? Go see for yourself. I'm confident enough to tell you to do this because it's simply not there. And here's my final thought for you Democrats out there. My final thought, really. If you look, what I'd like you to do is just this. I would like you to take a look at all of the things that Donald Trump has accomplished as president in terms of the economy and all of this stuff. And I'd like you to imagine that Donald Trump never existed, ever. And I'd like you to imagine that this last 4 years has been Barack Obama's third term. Just play with me on this, okay? If you're a Democratic voter, I'd like you to imagine that the last 4 years have been Barack Obama's third term. Record unemployment, low unemployment. unemployment for blacks, record low unemployment for Hispanics, record low unemployment for women, unparalleled economic growth that is affecting the bottom of the economic scale more than the top, security, the elimination of ISIS, the reduction of the North Korean threat, the protection of American industries, jobs coming back to manufacturing in America. I want you to imagine that all of this was done by Barack Obama in his third term. Okay? Now, if it turns out that that makes you feel good, you have to ask yourself a question. And the question you have to ask yourself is this. Would I rather have a country that's doing well at the hands of somebody I don't like, especially minorities doing well? Or would I rather have minorities doing badly, the economy doing badly, workers doing badly, having all these threats because I don't like Donald Trump? Because if your answer is I would like everything if it had been Barack Obama's third term, then the only thing that I can see left is that you care more about how somebody looks and sounds than about what they do and the effect that they have on the country and the poor people that you care about and that we care about as well. If you take Donald Trump out of the picture and look at the results that Donald Trump has delivered for poor Americans and for minorities and so on, and if you felt good about it if it was Obama, but bad about it if it's Trump, then what you're really saying is, I'd really rather see poor people suffer because I like somebody's look better than somebody else's. I like their smile better. I like the way they talk better. I don't care if they suffer and die and have no jobs. What I care about is how does the person look and sound? There are many times I don't like the way Donald Trump looks and sounds, but I care more about what he does than what he says. And if you can get to that place, you may have a chance to re-examine the situation. We'll be back with more commentary in the future as this horse race unwinds, but I genuinely think that this is an extremely decisive day as far as this election is concerned. And it's just an absolute pleasure to be here with Steve and Scott talking about these things, and all of this conversation made possible by a very small number of people who, being capitalists and patriots both, have decided that if they want to hear messages that are positive for America, and if these messages cost money, somebody has to pay for them, and so they do. If you want to be one of those people, you can go to BillWhittle.com and click on the Become a Member link. For Steve and Scott, I'm Bill Whittle. We'll see you next week right here on Right Angle.